Okay, we're back with our Theros Beyond Death set review for Limited. At this time, we're in red. And yeah, we're going to start with, well, alphabetically, the Akroan War. 4 mana saga. You gain control of a creature for as long as it's on the battlefield. Chapter 1. Chapter 2, your opponent's creatures have to attack you on the next turn. Um, well, until your next turn, but that's mostly just on their next turn. And then chapter 3, each tapped creature deals damage equal to its power to itself. So this is extremely good. Um, this can be, if they don't have many creatures that have higher toughness than power, something close to a Plague Wind. Um, you can block with the creature you stole is an important thing. It's usually at least going to be a 2-for-1. You can also attack with the creature you stole. Because they have to attack with everything, everything's probably going to be tapped for chapter 3. They can play a thing that has summoning sickness and then not have to attack with it. Play a thing on the second main phase and not have to attack with it. So they can have a creature back, maybe two if they can play two. Um, and then, like all the creatures that attacked, many of them are going to die, especially because you can selectively block. Otherwise, you might even just be able to eat stuff. Like, even if it didn't have Chapter 3, you could probably eat a decent amount or get favorable trades. You could trade off their creature you stole with another creature. There is a lot you can do, right? Do note that by the time Chapter 3 happens, you will have untapped the creature you stole if you attacked with it. So unless it has a tap ability or you have some way to tap it, you're not going to kill that creature if it's still around, and they're going to get it back when this goes away. So keep that in mind. But I mean, anyway, this card is to be very good. I think it's an A. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the best red card in the set. NX, Hardened in the Forge. Another X3 3-mana demigod where the power is equal to your devotion to red. Whenever it or another non-creature token you control dies, make a 1/1 satyr with that creature can't block. If the creature had 4 power or greater, you make 2 of them instead. So this is indicating that there's a go wide theme. There's more cards I know that make these tokens. There's a go wide aggressive theme in red. We saw a little bit of that in white with those 2 pseudo heroic creatures. So watch out for that archetype. This is going to be, a 3 mana 2/3 or 3/3 or 4/3 with some upside, and you're going to get these 1/1s. Them not being able to block is a real downside compared to if they could block, but it's not a downside compared to not getting them. So I think this card is pretty good, but not amazing. C plus B minus. Arena Trickster. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, you put a 1/1 counter on this. So this looks actually better than most of the blue payoffs we saw, not than the rare that drew you cards. But 4 mana 3/3 is almost good enough stats anyway. You only need to cast one spell on an opponent's turn to get this to be good at 4/4. You get two, it gets to be very good. Overall, I still don't think this is great. You're probably not going to be able to cast that many spells on your opponent's turn after you get this out, but it's still pretty good. I think this is a C plus probably. And I think it's probably closer to B minus than C, but I think I just still quite happy with it as at C plus. Maybe there will be enough flash and instance that this will actually be very, very good and it'll be easy to build around, but could also see you drawing it late and then it's just a 3/3. Aspect of Manticore, it's a 3 mana aura that will go on your creature probably. Enchanted creature gets +2/+0. That's pretty lame, but it gets first strike until end of turn when this thing ETBs. So you're mostly using this as a combat trick, which can, eat a creature and then stick around to give extra power. You really need the combat trick of it to go off for this to be worth much for you. That's not the easiest thing to do. It has all the normal aura problems. It's a bit expensive to be a combat trick. I think this is like a D plus. Blood Aspirant, 2 mana 1/1. Don't like it. But whenever you sacrifice a permanent, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay. So this looks like there were a lot of ways to sacrifice in black. Looks like that might be a black-red theme. And that also makes sense if there's more cards, a lot more cards that make these 1/1s, you can sack those. And this has 1 red and tap, sacrifice a creature or enchantment. So this is a way to sacrifice enchantments. And it pings a creature for 1, and that creature can't block this turn. So first of all, this is a way to pump damage through if your opponent needs to have more blockers back. But it also just kind of messes up combat, right? Is you have the threat of activation to deal effectively 1 extra damage to anything. You have 2/2/2s. You can kind of attack them into 2/3/3s, not really, because you could, sack 1 and then kill a 3/3, and you lose both. I mean, that's not good, but um, if you have a 2/3 and a card you're not afraid to sacrifice, you could attack it into a 3/3. And this thing grows at the same time. You can obviously kill X1s with it. You can attack with your 3/3s into their 2/4s, say, or your 2/3s into their 2/3s, that kind of thing. I think that threat of activation doesn't look like much, but it's going to come up more than it looks like typically. These kinds of effects are pretty good because you never have to actually activate it because they probably just won't block your 2/3 with their 2/3, so it just gets through. And you don't have to sack anything. And then later you can actually sacrifice something to kill their big thing and make their 1 creature not be able to block. Overall, you need fodder for this, which is not the easiest to come by from what we've seen. But just the overall value package makes me think this is going to be pretty good. C+, I could see it really being very good if there's enough stuff to help build around it. We haven't seen that much in black. We saw a couple of cards that gave you extra stuff or died into stuff, which is probably the color you'd want to pair this with. If there's more of this stuff in red, this gets better. But anyway, let's move to Careless Celebrant. 2 mana, 2/1. When it dies, it deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So you're rarely hitting a planeswalker, but this is very good, right? In combat, it can trade for any X4 because it blocks that thing or that thing blocks this. It deals 2 damage, and then when it dies, it deals 2 more damage. It can also trade for 2 2-drops in a lot of cases, right? This card seems very good to me in terms of 2-drops. And 2-drops are often a spot on your curve that you want to have good versions of. So I think this might even be a B-. Dreamshaper Shaman. 6 mana, 5/4, bit expensive, enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you can pay 3 and sacrifice a non-land permanent. If you do, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you find another non-land permanent and put that on top of your library. That effect seems good, but very slow. You need to have a not good thing to sacrifice, and you're just going to spin, and you're going to keep spinning until you find good things, basically. Right? You're going to do this most end steps. Not the turn you play it, because you're not going to have the mana. The thing is, it does take a lot of mana, and you might want to be doing other things. You can't sacrifice lands, or it would be very, very good, because you can't sacrifice lands, and it's a bit expensive and a bit slow. I think this might not be the best thing ever, but the mana sink ability is just still super solid. I think I'm going to give it a C+. Again, not super confident about that grade either, though. Dreamstopper Manticore, 3 mana, 4/2, which is a nice aggressive set of stats. I mean, not that great because you're probably going to have a 2-power, like a 2-drop to trade with it, but whenever you cast your first spell on each opponent's turn, it deals 1 damage to any target. So that's quite good. That's another pretty good ability. You only ever get a ping for 1, but again, the threat of activation with combat has to be defensively there, but you can maybe trade up. Probably more likely to trade up than really to effectively get and kill a thing outright, unless it's an X1. Great at picking off X1s. There's a lot of X1 hate, so do keep in mind that X1s are probably worse in this set than they normally would be. Um, yeah, but the 3-mana 4/2 is already good. I think this is like a C plus. Again, it's going to be a little hard to trigger this very often, so maybe it just ends up doing a couple extra damage to your opponent. If your opponent doesn't have a little blocker, this can be very good. This can trade with an X5 if you have an instant as well. So all in all, I mean, a good little card for only 3 mana, but not the best. C plus, maybe B minus, but I think I'm going to give it C plus. Escape velocity. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has haste. If you're playing an aggressive cheese 'em out deck, you might play this because it has escape. You can later on pay 2 extra mana, exile 2 cards, and give your next creature haste. So your opponent has to worry about that a bit. Also, you can sacrifice like this to your Dreamshaper Shaman, and this is the kind of card I want to sacrifice to my Dreamshaper Shaman, especially because then I can escape it back later and sacrifice it again to my Dreamshaper Shaman. Like a cheap escape card is what you want to sack here. Overall, I'm never impressed with these effects that much, especially because unlike Hammerhand or Cartouche of Zeal, it doesn't make a creature not block for a turn, which is what I often really find that I want from these effects. Haste isn't the worst thing ever, but it's also not the best thing ever. So I think overall I'm going to give this like a D plus. You are going to get cheesed out by it some, but honestly, I think it has more legs potentially, and look at these legs, but more legs potentially in constructed. Fateful End, 3 mana instant, deals 3 to any target, so that's nice. It can go upstairs. I guess it can hit a planeswalker. It can kill a creature, and a lot of creatures are going to die to 3 damage. Although we've seen some X4s, particularly in red, we're seeing more. And then Scry 1. Scry 1 is nice. It's like kind of a cross between a Magma Jet and a Lightning Strike. It does cost 3, so I don't think it can be great, but it's still pretty good even at 3 mana, I think. We're going to give this a B minus, I think. Final Flare, another 3 mana removal spell, another instant. But as an additional cost for this, you have to sack a creature and enchantment. Again, I'm worried about having enough fodder for all of these sacrifice things in red and black. If you do have enough fodder, because this deals 5 to a creature, that's going to kill most anything. So that's pretty good. You can do the sack and the block and sack trick with this, where you defensively stay alive longer. But overall, it's probably card disadvantage unless you can get more fodder. Having said that, because it can again sacrifice an enchantment, much like this, there's more ways to get that fodder because there's the omens in every color. And there might be some other enchantments that are not doing as much for you. Still, I think I'm going to only give this like a C because you really want to build around it to be very good. And if you have to sacrifice a real creature, it's pretty bad most of the time. Although it's not the worst ever. There was a white card in Shadows over Innistrad that was 3 mana to exile a creature. Maybe it was creature or enchantment. Something like that. But you had to sacrifice something. Maybe it was any permanent for that. And that was pretty good, Angelic Purge. This is not quite because it doesn't exile and it only does 5 damage. But it's yeah, it still should probably be okay. I'm going to give it a C overall. Some decks it's going to be worse. It's going to be definitely worse in multiples. Some decks where you can get a lot of fodder, it's going to be better. Let's move on to Flummoxed Cyclops. 4 mana 4/4 reach. 4 mana 4/4 reach is very good. But whenever 2 or more creatures your opponents control attack, this thing can't block this combat, which means a lot of times it can't block. If you have another big creature that's holding down the ground, this might be able to hold off an opposing flyer. But most of the time, if your opponent wants to attack, they're going to be able to attack with multiple creatures, I think. So this is quite a bit worse than a 4 mana 4/4 reach. It's probably quite a bit worse than just a 4 mana 4/4. But a 4 mana 4/4 is typically pretty good. I'm going to give this a C. But you probably mostly want to be aggressive. Let's move on to Furious Rise. 3 mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you exile the top card of your library and can play it until you exile another card with this. So if they get rid of your creature power 4 or more, then you can hold on to whatever you exiled. Otherwise, you're probably wanting to play that like your next turn or on your opponent's turn. This does happen at the beginning of your end step, so it triggers. It can trigger often. It's just a matter of how many 4-power creatures you can get. This might be 4 power. This is 4 power. This is 4 power. This is 4 power. These are uncommons that we've seen here. This can get to 4 power maybe. 4 power. So we've got a couple uncommons, a few uncommons, a common, maybe another common, a common, a mythic rare, a mythic rare that needs to be turned on. Yeah, I think this can be on a decent chunk of the time, but it's not like you're going to have tons and tons of 4-power creatures, and so it's just going to be off kind of often. The effect is so good, this card is probably still good, but you do need to build around it a bit. I'm going to go with a B? B minus. But you want to make sure you have a lot of 4-power dudes. Okay, Hero of the Games. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Hero of the Games creatures you control, it's this go wide thing again. This also makes this one a 4-power dude. Yeah, that same theme from white. So hopefully we're going to see more of these, more go wide enablers, because red looks like it really wants them in red white to go wide, and in red black to sacrifice stuff. So we want stuff to make tokens for red. This card is probably a C. If you have enough go wide stuff, maybe a C plus. Heroes of the Revel. 5 mana 4/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you make a 1/1, one of those 1/1s that can't block. Okay, this helps there. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Heroes of the Revel creatures you control. So it's another one of these pseudo-heroic dudes, and it comes with another dude. So it's 5 power, and if you target it, every time you target it, you get at least 2 more power. So that's not so bad. This is pretty good. It does make the extra stuff, which I think you really want. 5 mana 4/4, not bad stats. I think it's like a B, B minus maybe. Yeah, B minus. Impending Doom. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3. That's pretty good for 3 mana. And attacks each combat with Able. Probably don't want to put it on your opponent's thing though, because it's +3/+3. When it dies, Impending Doom deals 3 damage to that. When an enchanted creature dies, this deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. So, do you want to put it on your own guy and make it attack every turn, and when it dies, you take 3, but it's +3/+3. So, do you want to put it on your opponent's guy? But then they have a +3/+3 dude, so you have to put it on a small dude, and then it just does 3 to them. And you have to have a really big thing to be able to block it successfully. I think you're mostly putting it on your own thing, but it has multiple drawbacks, along with being an aura inherently. It is a big stat boost, and so if your opponent doesn't have unconditional removal, it's going to be a bit hard to get rid of profitably. So it might be good, but it's going to be one of these, you feel bad losing to it, you feel like you're cheesing them out when you win with it. I'm going to say it's a C minus, because I think that you often can have better stuff to do. But, like, don't get me wrong, this is a potentially powerful effect, the +3/+3. Not defensively, so you really need to be aggressive, but you can really cheese some people out with this. 3/3 is a lot of stats. Incendiary Oracle, 2 mana 2/2, fine. 2 mana smoke, so smoke breathing basically. 2 mana to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. And then if a creature dealt damage by this guy, gal, it's probably a woman. If this by this woman, well, this creature, let's just not have it be a question. If a creature dealt damage by this creature this turn would die, you exile that creature instead. Yeah, this is solid. 2 mana 2/2 with the smoke breathing is just a super solid creature. Um, right, you want 2 drops a lot, especially in red tends to be aggressive, and it seems to be pretty aggressive here. You want 2 drops to help you go wide. The smoke breathing helps it trade up later, or occasionally get in some extra damage. There's a mana sink, and the exile is like not a big deal, but it's kind of nice. This is a solid C. Infuriate is a pretty good combat trick, +3/+2 for just 1 mana. We've seen a number of things that want to be targeted, and this seems like one of the better combat tricks we're going to see. It's not quite full giant growth, but hey, we are red. I think this is maybe even a C+, but probably just a C. C+. Irosis Blessing. It's an aura. When it ETBs, it deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, and enchanted creature gets +1/+1. So you need to make sure this resolves on your dude. But if it does, it probably kills a thing, and then, okay, it's fine to leave around. This seems good to me. So, yeah. C+. You do need to make sure it's going to resolve, but I think you should usually be able to do that. And killing something with up to 4 toughness is pretty good even for 4 mana. And then the +1/+1 is a real upside if you can get that to if you can hang on to that. You just need to make sure you resolve it. Irreverent Revelers. When it ETBs, you can either nuke an artifact or give it haste until end of turn. Well, they keep making these a little bit better. I don't know that artifacts are going to be super important in this set. I haven't really looked at them. Let's just take a quick look at how many there are. A couple commons, a few uncommons, a few rares, another common. Yeah, I don't know how good those are. Traveler's Amulet, I know. There's a reasonable chance that they're gonna have an artifact, but you really wanted them to have an artifact for this to be good because it's undersized otherwise. And a 3 mana 2/2 haste is just also not really what I'm looking for. So overall, I don't think this is that great. It might be a sideboard card. It might be like a D+. Probably a sideboard card mostly, though. Maybe more constructed applications. Nyxborn Brute, 5 mana 7/3. Well, if you need creatures with power 4 or greater, this guy's here. If you can somehow get your creatures through, if you can like jump this or give it trample, some kind of evasion, then you want this dude. Otherwise, we saw a 5 mana 3/7 in original Theros, and it was fine. This is mostly just going to trade with any creature your opponents have, though, including 3 drops. So I'm not in love with it. It's probably like a C-. You can play it. Maybe a D+. Yeah, you can play it, but you're not happy to. Usually. Maybe you can get some other value out of Constellation or giving it evasion or something. Omen of the Forge. 2 mana flash Omen. It shocks anything. And then, like the other Omens, you can sack it to scry to. We've seen enough stuff that that sacks enchantments, and enough stuff that wants you to play on your opponent's turn, and this has flash in red, that I think this card, I mean, 2 mana shock's already usually pretty decent. This card has a couple more upsides. I mean, it's an enchantment, it gives you devotion, this flash, so it plays with the playing in your opponent's turn stuff. It's an enchantment to sack to your stuff that wants to sack stuff. I think this is going to be like a B- even because of it has all the synergies. Normally shock is like a C. 2 mana shock is like a C- or a C. I think this is going to be at least a C+, and I'm going to go out there and say this might even be a B-. It has a lot of synergies here. Oread of Mountain's Blaze, 2 mana for a 1/3, meh. 3 to Rummage, also kind of meh. This is like kind of playable. If you really want enchantments, you can play this. I mean, the mana sink is okay. If you flood out, this will help you from that, and if you need the blocker, but I think you mostly don't. I think I'm going to give this a D+ as well. Ox of Agonis, 5 mana 4/2. When it ETBs, you discard your hand and draw 3. Because it's a 5-drop, you're mostly going to be drawing 3 and discarding like 1 or 2 probably, especially because if you have other good cards in your hand, you can play those first. So 5 mana 4/2 draw 3, very good. 5 mana 4/2 draw 2, where the card you discarded is probably not that good, also pretty good. So we already like this card. And then you can escape it. It's going to be real hard to get 8 other cards in your graveyard until very late. If you can, like very late, this is good because it's probably going to trade, right? And then it'll be in your graveyard. And then if you can ever escape it, it's basically just a draw 3, and it's a 5/3, and you only had to pay 2 mana for it. You did have to pay 8 more cards, so it's very good there. I think this is like a B plus, probably a B plus, because you can play for the game going long. You can trade stuff off, and you can maybe try to work to get 8 cards in your graveyard. I think mostly you're just going to want to not put too many other escape stuff in your deck. You maybe discarded 1 card from when you originally played this. Mostly it's just like a 5 mana 4/2 draw 3, but that's already very, like, just drawing 3 or a 4/2 draw 2 is already very good for 5 mana in limited. And then the escape is just gravy, right? So maybe you can't escape it super often. If you ever do escape it, you're like probably winning the game, unless you're decking, um, which is surprisingly scary and limited because you've already drawn 3 extra cards from this, and you're drawing 3 extra cards again, and you had 8 cards in your graveyard, so it was very late in the game. You're like never escaping this twice and winning from it. But yeah, you can escape it once and you like win the game. You escape it no times and it's a good card. I think it's a B plus. Phoenix of Ashe, 3 mana 2/2 flying haste. You can pay 3 to give it +2/+0 until end of turn, and you can escape it for 4, exiling 3 other cards. So 3 other cards is not many. 4 mana 3, and it escapes with a +1/+1 counter. So 4 mana 3/3 flying haste is good. 3 mana 2/2 flying haste is good. Both with this Phoenix breathing, I'm gonna call it. Yeah, super solid card. Not a total bomb, but especially in your aggressive decks, it also can be a little sack fodder if you really need that because you can escape it again. Yeah, this looks like well, probably a B, B minus, I'm gonna say. Because if your opponent can get a blocker that can block this, it suddenly doesn't. You know what? No, B, because it does have this activated ability. It's going to at least trade again, and then trading again. No, this is at least a B. This might be a B plus, because this can win the game by itself. With the activated ability, you're just going to trade for a blocker, and then 3 cards is not that many. You're going to get it back. You're at least going to trade for a blocker. It's going to be a lot of card advantage for you, and or punch through and win the game. Yeah, really good card. I'm going to call it a B plus. Portent of Betrayal. It's a reprint from original Theros. You act of treason / threaten something. Costs 4 mana, but then you also get a scry 1. I think this is going to be better than normal here because black-red does seem to have this sacrifice theme, and I think enough of that stuff is cheap enough that you can steal and sack stuff. 4 mana is a little bit iffy for some of it. Some of those activations were 3 mana. But I think if you're in that deck, then this becomes a solid playable, like a C, maybe a C plus. And if you're not in that deck, it's pretty bad. So it would be like a D there. Overall, it's probably like a C minus, maybe a D plus. Because I think in red, you're often going to have at least some outlets. If you're in red-black, it's much better. Overall, I'm going to say C minus. Like, it doesn't do nothing just as active treason. You might be able to steal a thing and kill your opponent too, right? Purphoros Bronze Blooded. 5 mana god this time. It still needs the devotion of 5 to red to be a creature. 7/6 is huge. Other creatures you control have haste is nice. And then it gets this 3 mana sneak attack kind of thing, which is mostly useful if you have something huge, which you probably, if you already have 5 mana for Purphoros, can cast most anything else from your deck that you'd be putting on. And you'd much rather cast than just sneak something in. But I guess it's a little bit of upside, even in limited. It's mostly for constructed. Giving your other creatures haste is pretty bad. I mean, it's not bad, but it's bad if you're just spending 5 mana for this. So, much like many of the other gods, you really want this to be on. If this is on, then whoo lads! 7/6 indestructible is big, is really big. The other thing is you can play another creature after this to turn this on, and that has haste, and you're suddenly smashing for a lot, so it's kind of hard for your opponent to play around this, unless you only have like just this for devotion. Um, so they really need to be pressuring your devotion by making you want to trade off your other creatures. I think I'm going to also give this one a B plus. Because it's so big, I could see it being an A minus. Being more expensive isn't really that bad on these gods because by the time they're on, it's probably you're going to have played a 5-drop anyway, or be able to, so it's not that big a deal. I guess this doesn't give itself haste, which you kind of do feel. So I'm not 100% sure, but yeah. Let's move on to OSIS Intervention. X in a red deals twice X to target creature or planeswalker, or you make an X1 red elemental with trample and haste that sacrifices at the beginning of your next end step. The second mode is much better than the first mode, but unlike a lot of the other ones, the first mode is much more playable than like just the random graveyard hate or life gain, because you can kill someone with this out of nowhere, which is something that I think will come up more than those other modes. Maybe not as flexible as the counter spell in blue, but yeah, you're mostly going to be using this for the second mode, where at 2 mana it is a shock, which is fine. At 3 mana it deals 4, which is good. At 4 mana it deals 6, which is very good. Suddenly you're killing most anything. So this is a really good removal spell, probably even a little more efficient than the black one. I'm going to give this a B plus, because when it's not a removal spell, first of all, when do you not need a removal spell? But second of all, when you don't need a removal spell, you can probably kill them with this. So, and the flexibility is really good here. It's a little bit cheaper because the twice X on the second mode. Let's move on to Satyr's Cunning, which is red for a sorcery that makes a 1/1 and escapes for exiling only 2 other cards and paying 3. So you really want to have a lot of reasons to have these tokens before you include this in your deck. Because, right, 1 mana to make a 1/1 that can't block is bad. 4 mana to make 2 1/1s that can't block is bad. 7 mana to make 3 1/1s that can't block, even if it's on the installment plan, is pretty bad. And, like, sure, the exiling is kind of not that many that you have to exile here. It's also still not free. But mana-wise, this is never efficient, really. So you really want to be in for the sacrifice, go wide stuff. I don't know if you're ever that in. Maybe you might get that in. This is like a D. It's like a build around, but I'm just going to call it a D or a D minus. I will try this in those decks that want to have a lot of sacrifice and or go wide stuff. Maybe even just and. But I'm not thinking that it's probably going to be very good. Let's move on to Skophos Maze Warden. It's a 4 mana 3/4 that you can pay 1 to give it +1/-1 until end of turn. This card is very good. 4 mana 3/4 is good. It can trade up if there's like a 6/6 or something. You can trade with that by just pumping it a few times. If there is a 2/4, you can pump it once and eat that, so they can't block with a 2/4. If they don't block it, you can get in with a bunch of damage. You have to be a little bit careful in case they have like one of the shocks that's an instant or something. So you have to be a little bit careful for it, but it's pretty good. And then whenever another creature becomes the target of an ability of a land you control named Labyrinth of Skophos, you may have this thing fight that creature. That land takes a lot of mana to activate. It's a fine inclusion in your deck. I have seen that land. I just don't think that that's going to come up very much. But it's some more upside. So I think this is like a C plus, B minus. I think B minus. I really like the first ability, and a 4 mana 3/4 is a C already. No, we're going to call it C plus. If you have the Labyrinth, then maybe it's a B minus, but we're going to call it C plus. Skophos War Leader, 5 mana 4/5. You can pay red and sacrifice another creature enchantment, another sack outlet, to give it +1/+0 and menace until end of turn. Well, that ability is not really what I'm interested in, because +1/+0 and menace is just not that great. and I don't want to sacrifice much for it, so I really want it to be fodder. Or if I'm getting in or making them double block with cards that can't kill this anyway if they double block, then that's good. Like if they have 2/2/2s, then I'm more happy to sack a thing, although they probably just take the damage at that point if they can. It's a 5-drop. 5 drops are replaceable. I don't think this is very good. It's like a D plus, I think. There's other sack outlets that seem better too. Anyway, Stampede Rider is a 3-mana 2/3 trample that gets +1/+1 at the beginning of each combat, not only on your turn, but each combat if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. And again, there's quite a decent number of those. So this is going to be a pretty good impression of a 3-mana 3/4 trample in a decent number of the time. 3-mana 2/3 trample is okay. 3-mana 3/4 trample is good, but not great. Overall, this is going to be a C, maybe a C plus. Probably just a C though. Because by the time you have a 4-power creature, giving this +1/+1 is a little bit less impressive. I don't know. Storm Herald's a 3-mana 3/2 haste. When it enters the battlefield, you can return any auras from your graveyard attached to creatures you control, but then you lose them at the end of turn or if they would otherwise leave play. This does not seem like a particularly good effect to me. Again, we haven't seen that many auras we want, and so I don't think you're going to have many in your graveyard. 3-mana 3/2 haste isn't that impressive. It's not that bad, so I think I'm going to give this still like a D plus, C minus, probably D plus. But yeah. Storm's Wrath, 4 mana, deals 4 damage to each creature in Planeswalker. I'm in. It's not quite a Wrath, and it won't kill their big things, which could be problematic. But you might also have big things, which would be good. But just 4 mana to deal 4 to anything is a nice option to be able to have. I think it's a little bit worse than the White Wrath we saw, but it's still like a B plus. Tectonic Giant. So Storm's Wrath B to B plus. Tectonic Giant, 4 mana 3/4. Whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, it deals 3 to each opponent, or it exiles the top 2 cards of your library and you can play it until the end of your next turn. So the card advantage thing is big. Dealing 3 to them might also be big. The optionality between the two should be very good. 4 mana 3/4, it can probably attack reasonably profitably most of the time. And even if you have to do just like a little bit of work to be able to make this attack, you can use combat tricks, you can whatever. You're likely to be able to blow your opponent out with any kind of combat trick, and we've seen some of those. So yeah, this card seems extremely good to me. If you don't have a combat trick and they just have like a 5/5, it kind of doesn't do much. So I don't think it's like an A plus. I think I'm gonna give it an A minus nevertheless, though. It's very good. Thrill of Possibility, 2 mana instant, discard a card as a cost, and then you draw 2. Cards are fine. This works well with the play on your opponent's turn theme, but it's just not that great of a card. I'm gonna give it a D plus. Triumph of Anax, however you pronounce that person's name. 3 mana saga with 4 chapters where the first 3 are each giving a creature you control. I guess it doesn't have to be you control. +X+O, where X is the number of lore counters under Triumph of Anax. So first, when you play this, it gives one of your creatures +1/+0 and trample. And the next turn +2/+0 and trample. And then the next turn 3+3/+0 and trample. So it's mostly just a way to try to get extra damage in. But your opponent's likely to be able to trade with your stuff. And if it trades with your stuff, your later chapters do less. So you mostly want to do this on little creatures that the pump lets them attack. Maybe you just play a bit more bigger creatures later too. I don't know. Target creature, and then the fourth chapter, the last chapter, is target creature you control fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So you get a fight if you want it, which is good for 3 mana. It takes a long time for that though. Overall, I think the card is pretty good if you have a lot of creatures in a low curve, mostly low curve that gets into like some 4 drops. which is a lot of red decks, to be fair. So I think I'm going to give this a C plus. It's a little hard to tell. Underworld Underworld Breach is 2 mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you have to sack it. But each non-land card in your graveyard has escape, with the escape cost equal to the mana cost plus exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard. This looks like a really fancy regrowth to me. You need 8 cards in your graveyard and a bunch of mana to be able to get 2 things back with this. Or you've got to play 2 mana to play this. You need to pay, and then you need to pay mana for each card you're escaping equal to that card's mana cost, and you need to be able to exile 3 more cards. So if you're just getting like 2 3-drops or a 2-drop and a 4-drop back, you need 8 cards in your graveyard and 8 mana on your turn. I just don't think that's going to happen much. So mostly it's going to be like you're going to replay a card from your graveyard. It costs 2 extra because you had to play this first, and you have to exile 3 more cards from your graveyard. In the extreme late game, you might be able to get 2 things with this. I sincerely doubt you're ever going to get 3. This card seems potentially very good in some older constructed formats, but for limited it seems about unplayable. I don't think regrowth is that good either, and especially this because you have to play it in the same turn, and it costs more of your resources from your graveyard. It's like a D minus. I mean, maybe you can play it if you have some really heavy self mill, or you know that the game is likely to go super long and you can get a 2-for-1 out of it. But then you have to hold it forever, and maybe you just have a big enough bomb as well that like a 1-for-1 is good enough. But I don't know. I think this is close to unplayable, if not unplayable, and limited. Let's move on to Underworld Fires. 2 mana, it deals 1 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. For all players, keep that to note. If permanent dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile instead. Seems really bad, and from what we've seen of this format, there's not going to be many X1s, and there's so much X1 hate already, there's really not going to be many X1s, which is what you'd really want this to be doing. You can combine it with other stuff, but I don't really think that's where you want to be. So I'm going to call this like a D. Maybe you board it in. Like if your opponent shows up with a bunch of X1s, sure, you board it in. But next we have Underworld Ragehound. It's a 2 mana 3/1 that has to attack each combat if able. X1, already setting off some alarm bells. But it is escape for 4 and exile only 3 other cards from your graveyard, and it escapes as a 4/2. If you're really aggressive, this might be okay, but I'm not super thrilled with it in general. I mean, the escape makes it playable, right? And if you're aggressive, it might be good. But if you draw it later, it's likely to just like get eaten, and then you replay it, and it might just get eaten again, or it might trade for something small, like a 2-drop. It might trade with 2-drops the whole time, but by that late in the game, how good is that? I don't know. I don't think this card's that great because it has to attack each combat if able. If it didn't have to do that, then I'd be much higher on this card. You could block with it a lot more effectively. But as it is, I think I'm a C minus on it. Wrap in Flames deals 1 damage to each of up to 3 target creatures, and they can't block this turn. So this is the way that you just alpha strike and win, because you make your opponent's creatures not be able to block. It's also good against X1s, but there's so much X1 hate already. I think this is mostly a sideboard card, but if you're very aggressive, you can main deck it. I'm going to call it a D+. The falter effects are typically not great, but if you're all in on being aggro, then it can be good. That does it for red. We'll see you with green soon.